Hi everyone, this is Tanya from Flying Dog Studio. Thanks so much for joining me. In this particular video, we are going to be looking at inking a building. Now this particular building is a church, and I got the reference photo from a website that I'm going to list down below. They have the ability to check on there for license-free reference photos, and that's what I did here. I am currently going over my drawing with a teeny tiny kneaded eraser. This is just a piece off of my husband's eraser. I forgot to purchase one last time I was at the art store, so I'm just kind of knocking back those lines so that we can ink over it. Now I know that we are a day late because this is coming out on November 1st for Inktober, but this is, while I'm inking this piece, this was not for Inktober. I'm actually going to do some watercolor on it, which will come out in a part 2 in the next week or so. So as I'm getting this finished up, we are getting ready to start the piece. I am using the fountain pen that I used in my last video, which was a loose drawing of a barn. However, I have changed ink. This ink is a waterproof ink, and I can say that it does seem to be rather sticky. Since this is a 100% cotton paper, it seems to pick up the fibers, so I do have to clean it every time I put it down and take a little bit of a break, which I do have to do that because of my arthritis. It tends to clog up on the end. So the other ink, which was not a waterproof ink, did not do that. So I will list the ink that I'm using. I'll show you at the end, and then I'll also link that down below. Now, something I did want to tell you that's kind of humorous. I do speed up my videos so you don't have to watch every little step at the painfully slow pace that I draw. And while this may look as if it's normal speed or close to normal speed, this is actually 2 times the speed that I do this in real life. This piece took me about 3 hours to do because, like I said, I'm painfully slow. Plus, I do have arthritis, so I like to stop and give my hands a rest ever so often. So from start to finish, it took about 3 hours. So I'm just going to be lining this in. I'm not really worried about keeping things super duper straight. I did pencil this in. The last piece that I did, as I mentioned earlier, was that loose drawing that I did with the barn where I just started with ink, and that was fun. But as I mentioned in that video, I do like to start with pencils. So thought I would kind of sketch this in with pencil and then go over it, but I'm not being super careful about staying on the lines because I do want it to seem loose, but I didn't want it to be crooked. This wasn't a falling down barn like the last piece, so I did want to have a little more structure to this building. I'm going to continue on with the piece, just getting the outside contour lines on the whole building and also with the tree. And then at the end, I'm going to come back and switch pens, and we're going to get some shading on this piece. So I'll come back then and talk a little bit more about my process. Now that that part is finished, I am putting down my Parker fountain pen and picking up my Prismacolor marker. This is a .005, and I am going to use this to get the shading on the piece. Now I'm doing my hatch marks, and most of my hatch marks will be at this diagonal angle. I will change a few to go up and down to kind of indicate length. You can use hatch marks to create shape, you can use them to create depth, and you can use them to show the height of something. So I'm using tiny marks here. I want these shingles to look sort of more like slate shingles and not just regular shingles on a building. I don't really want them to be wooden shingles. To be honest, I didn't have a plan on this. I just knew how I wanted them to look. And so I'm just putting that basic shading in, and I can decide on color once I start to lay in the watercolor. So I'm going to do this process through the entire shingles, and I'm creating depth so you can tell that the wood trim there is causing those shingles to set back just a bit. Now again, the angle I'm getting on this side of the roof, when I go to the opposite side, I'm going to keep the same direction on the diagonal. Now it won't be perfect as I'm switching to different areas, but I do want the diagonals to stay the same. You don't have to do that when you're doing hatching in a piece. This is something I prefer. Some artists do it this way. Some artists go with the contour of the piece, but pretty much everything on this building is flat. So you can see underneath the top of the roof where you have that soffit going back at the very top where it comes up to the A on the roof, and also on that little porch that's coming out. I do have those going down to indicate height and to indicate that those are behind the rest of the roof coming out. So that is when I do change an angle on there. I actually had not intended to put these wooden slats, I guess you could call them, or trim on this part of the building, but I decided at the last minute to put those on. So that's what you're seeing here. I picked that fountain pen back up and went ahead and redrew those pieces, and now I'm going to go back and do some more shading. Now you will also notice that on either side of the building there where the little porch is coming out and underneath the window, that is more shaded. So I used the same kind of hatching marks. I just went in over it a few more times, and that creates more depth. I want just some random shadows over here to show the direction that the sun is coming in. So to get that, instead of doing long smooth strokes, I'm going over it very quickly, and the pen makes more of a scratching noise on the surface of the paper when you do that. So that's why it looks lighter. It's actually skipping across the paper. So if you want a really light shade, that's what you're going to do with these pens. But in a dark area like this, I keep those lines short, I keep them close together, and I try to move a little more slowly with it. It looks fast there because, like I said, I do have it speeded up, but that is how I'm creating those shadows. As I said earlier, I did create this where it is an up and down and not a diagonal. So it is a vertical line, and I'm coming back and putting some tinier marks in here. And the reason I'm doing that is it creates more of a depth. It really punches that depth home. It shows that it's darker at the top, but as it comes down more into the light, that shadow gets lighter. So sometimes I'll put the long lines in first and then the short lines on top, or I'll start with the short lines and then put the long lines on top, which is what I will do with those shingles. I started with some short lines on the shingles, and then I'll come back and do the longer lines on top. As far as shadow on the tree goes, this tree was sort of over to the side. It was not in this position. It was just a tree in the picture, and I could only see a portion of it. So most of this tree is from my imagination, but we think about where the light is going to fall on the tree. And when we draw the tree, we want to create clumps of where the foliage would be. And we want a little bit of the trunk showing through and some of the branches to give it a little more believability. But we don't have to draw every single leaf and every single part of the tree. So we think about if the light is shining down on it underneath those clumps, it's going to be a little bit darker. So I'm going to give those a little bit of sort of an arch shape underneath where the clumps of leaves would be. And then when we come back and put color on, or even if we don't put color on, it does give us a feeling of a tree. And we have come to the end of this piece. I am, as I said earlier, going to have a watercolor version of this, so please be looking for that in the next couple of days. And these are the pens that I use, my Prismacolor and my Parker, and that is the ink, Doc Martens Bombay Black and waterproof. If you have any questions, please put those down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.